Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reflections of Music and Nature. I'm really happy to be joined by some very talented musicians from Left Coast Chamber Ensemble, which is a group based in San Francisco that regularly performs and commissions new works as well as programming them alongside works from all across time and space. I have here Anna Presler, who is violinist and the artistic director of Left Coast Ensemble. I have Tanya Tomkins, who is cellist, and Stacey Pelinka, who's on flute. And of course, I could list all their numerous accomplishments too, but I probably don't have time for that. First of all, really nice to see all of you, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Before I forget, I want to mention that you all have a sort of live stream performance that's coming up. Could maybe one of you tell us a little bit about that and how people can watch that?
On June 1st, we're going to play a concert, Sheltering Music. It's an alternate program from the one we had originally planned. So it's all solo works or duos played by people who live together and thus can rehearse safely.
Great.
So it includes Schumann, Bird as Prophet. Eric's going to play that. And Stacey's playing, how do you pronounce that composer's name?
Pedras Vox?
Yes.
Yes.
Landscapes with Birds. So those are the two nature-y pieces on the program. And Leighton, my husband, who's the other cellist in the group besides Tanya, is going to play a piece by Wiedmann with me, which I'm really excited to hear. And there's lots more music, so everyone's welcome to join us on Monday at 7:30, and it will be streamed. You can get there by going to our website.
That's great, and I'll add a link as well in the video too that you can all click on. So let's see. Maybe I could start by asking kind of a general question. What are some of the ways that your work as an ensemble and as performers is connected with nature or responds to the natural world? Like, I mean, you mentioned just those many pieces that are happening in the upcoming concert, but like, how does that influence your decisions as an ensemble and what you do as performers?
We've been interested in some nature-related things over the years that have come up. So one of the programs that coalesced was around water, and Stacey was really involved in that. We played Voice of the Whale, which is from the early 70s. It's a really theatrical, amazing piece, and it uses the cello in this way that sounds like the recording of the voice of the whale, which I think people only heard in the 20th century, right?
Yeah,
So
that technique where someone's called Siegel effect, where like you hold this and then you keep your hand the same so it sounds like, right? Is that what you're talking about?
yes.
Yeah.
And there were other water pieces.
We did Takamitsu Toward the Sea for flute and guitar.
Which I think he donated to Greenpeace in support of their work. And so we played that program in our normal venues, and then we also played it in a few house concerts where a good friend of ours named Hendrik Bloom, who's a water scientist and is very, very amusing physicist, great sense of humor, he came and he explained to all of us why it is that water is an anomalous molecule, which is not something that one ever knew before. And it was really exciting and fun to have the music and then have this whole other scientific version of what water was. So that was one of the programs. Hanya is very interested in ecology and in what musicians can do to try to help the effort to save the planet. And so we were talking one day walking up the hill, and I just wanted to do something with a cello choir and some soloists from Left Coast playing with it, so I thought that would be fun. And she had this great idea to commission a composer that she knows to write a piece. And probably it would be better if she tells you about that.
that would be a great segue into that topic. Yeah. So tell us about that commission, and you know the composer personally, and there's the cello choir, which are, I think, amateur cellists, right? Also, and then you and I guess Leighton are playing on the sort of first and second.
Yeah, so this was such an exciting project because, as Anna said, I have been interested in climate change for a long time. I think for the last probably over 10 years now, I've like spent a lot of sleepless nights reading about what's happening and about the glaciers melting and sort of panicking about it. And a lot of times even questioning like, you know, why am I still playing music? I should become an activist. I mean, if I care about it so much, I mean, is music actually superfluous to what we're doing to the planet right now? And about that, I've sort of come to the conclusion over the years that it is one of the more benign things we can do, as long as we're not like flying all around the planet to do it, which, you know, right now during the pandemic, you can see how clean the air has suddenly gotten and how we're not flying all over the place, and you can get quite a lot done. I was sort of hoping out of this situation we could sort of re-examine our patterns as musicians about flying to a different, you know, city a week to go do a concert. And something like Left Coast is so cool because like Anna and I live a block away. We all live very close, and so it feels really local. And I think that's a direction that would be great for us all to go in. But anyway, so I was fretting about all this, and I was feeling like I wanted to do something. And as Anna said, we were walking up the hill, and she said, well, everybody loves the cello. Like, what if we got a bunch of cellos together? So I guess I had recently heard a piece that Clarice Assad, who I met at the Moab Music Festival, she's just like such a sparkling person and such an inspiring musician and person. I'd heard a guitar concerto that she had written for Mark Teicholz, and I was completely blown away by it. And I'm like, oh, wow, I bet she could do something really good with this. So we called her, and she was like, yeah, I can do it easy. You know, oh, amateurs, no problem. I'm really used to it because, you know, my dad, Sergio Assad, the great guitarist, you know, he's always like writing for amateur guitar orchestras, and we're used to writing for people of every level. And so she was great at writing different parts for different abilities of playing. And it was a fantastic process learning the piece. But the best thing was that I was telling her, like, I want this to be about climate change, and I'm really depressed about it and whatever. And, you know, I was kind of expecting some tragic thing that we were all going to be bawling at the end, you know, and like the planet is going down the tubes and there's no hope for the future and everything. And, you know, what kind of music was this going to be? But true to her spirit, she really turned it into something incredibly positive. So she said, what if we focus on this theme of Lemuria, which is the name of the piece, which is some kind of like mythical society that supposedly existed way a long time ago before humans as we know them now. And these people were really kind to each other, and they really understood nature, and they understood the planet, and they treated it really well. And something happened to them. We don't know where they went, but let's go back to that time and sort of use that as a model for now. So it was a very like sort of tender, positive approach in sort of saying like, what if we were just nicer to each other and nicer to the planet and not doing what we're doing right now? And that was great because the piece turned out to be incredibly uplifting. And I wasn't expecting that, and I think it helped us all. And the fact that there were a lot of amateurs in it was also really nice because I think the whole issue of the planet and climate change is going to require everybody to come together as a community from all walks of life to try to do something together. And, you know, right now with the pandemic, like I said, I feel like there's kind of an opportunity, like all the scientists are getting together to try to find the vaccine or whatever. But I think it's true, too, for climate change that we must come together, like, as a whole world. So there was, like, a little microcosm of everybody coming together in the piece. So you had, like, a child, and you had a retired famous history professor from UC Berkeley, and you had an anesthesiologist and somebody who worked for Pixar, and they were all there with their cellos, and just, Leighton was so good with them too, really great. He spent hours and hours training them in this rhythm, and we had such fun learning it. And So it felt nice to do it. You know, I'm not sure that I've improved my carbon footprint any from having commissioned this or played it, but it felt good, and it was nice just to get music somehow more involved in what we can do. If I'm not going to quit the cello and become an activist, like at least maybe there's like art that we can do and make and think about that will help us think about what we might be able to do better.
I'm really glad that you bring that up, actually. I mean, this issue of like wondering about, I mean, stressing about climate change and worrying, like, what are we doing? We're musicians. Like, is this really helping? Obviously, doing a concert and putting on a, performance and commissioning a piece, that's not going to literally reduce one's carbon footprint and contribute to a solution, right? But at the same time, I think, commissioning a piece like this, it goes a lot deeper than merely, I don't know, even drawing attention to an issue, which of course it does. But I think, like you said, there's something cathartic about it as well. And something, creating something of beauty, I think that's important, even when the world seems like it's falling apart. Yeah.
And there was so much fun that was had learning it. By I think Leighton and I think, felt really happy to be around these amateur musicians who were just so excited to learn this piece and that we could all do it together. And, it was less about perfection and more about inclusivity, which was really nice, I think.
Do you feel like, you mentioned that like for maybe the last decade or so, you've been preoccupied with this issue. Do you feel like over time you've come to any shifts or realizations about your own role as an artist and as a musician, like in all those years of reflection?
Well, I think I had sort of a turning point because I felt like if I just worried enough and if I could just read enough about it and find out enough about it, then somehow that would help. But actually, it sort of doesn't. I mean, I think somebody like, of course, Greta Thunberg is like really speaking truth to power and doing that. I mean, that's fantastic. She's taken that kind of obsession and she's embodying it and doing something with it. And I'm not doing that. I'm still playing the cello and I'm still playing chamber music and teaching music. And so I think at a certain point I stopped feeling bad about that. And I decided that it's okay to like lead your best life and to contribute something of beauty to the world right now, because actually people need it. I know, like, we just played recently with Left Coast Quartet for the End of Time, and that's a really powerful piece, and people were coming up and saying, like, I just needed that so much right now. Like, thank you. Like, that helped me. And so that feels good because, maybe my role in the world with all my worry about climate change is not going to be that I'm going to be out there, protesting the pipeline, but maybe just adding beauty and making people feel better while we're all going through this together.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think, yeah, like giving people an experience like this, as musicians, that you've worked so hard all your life to do this, like you're offering something that other people cannot offer. Mm-hmm. Like someone like Greta Thunberg, she's, even for herself, she's someone who became depressed from just what you're saying, from reading all the news, right? And so she decided to get up and do something. But I think like for us, we can still do something, even if it's not necessarily directly, like you said, living your best life and doing what you're good at the best way that you can.
Can I say a word about that as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been thinking along the same lines, Tanya, really, really doing a lot of soul searching about, what I'm doing in the world. And I've been reading the works of Joanna Macy, and she's really talking about, she's talking about climate change, but also just creating a better society all across the board. And part of her work is to really take in the difficult emotions around what's going on in our world and not deaden our response. She says one of the biggest difficulties is that we have this, huge amount of denial going on. And so I think music in that way can be kind of an enlivening of the response and a healing force. So much of music is like a channeling of different expression and emotion, and it can be a way to kind of tap into that in people and to allow them to become more responsive and more kind of in tune with their own feelings about it, and also kind of a balm for that as well, for the kind of despair we feel sometimes. Maybe really good medicine.
Right, because the scientists and all the people with these that are creating data and information about that's obviously essential, right, in order to help solve the problem. But there's another side, which is like processing information and dealing with the emotional and psychological and philosophical aspect of these tragedies. Like that science, I mean, data collection, that doesn't really achieve that need, but art does. I would argue. So I think it's very important also. Maybe we could listen to a little bit of that piece from Clarice Assad. This is the last movement that I'll show. Maybe Tanya, could you set it up a little bit? Like you should check out on Clarice Assad on her website. She has kind of this, a description of this piece. It's really involved and very ambitious. So.
Okay. So this is the very end of Clarice Assad's piece that sort of tells a whole story of the society of Lemuria, and it ends. It ends really interestingly with having the audience participate by making wind sounds. And she actually wrote several different endings. And she said, which one do you like? Do you like that we invite the audience in and that everybody's making this sound? And I loved that idea because that was, again, like just bringing everyone together to be thinking about this story that she's told through music about this amazing society that knew how to take care of the planet.
Yeah, I would definitely consider that more uplifting, which I guess was not totally what you were expecting, right? From that, a piece about a society that is ultimately suffers from sea level rise, right?
Yeah, exactly. I thought she was going to write something really sad and sort of tragic, and then this is what she came up. You can see her in the background of that video with the microphone. She's just
Right.
help us like be a little more Brazilian with the rhythms.
Right.
And she's a great singer herself and huge master of rhythms. But I thought Lauren was incredible with the percussion, and of course Matilda is always amazing as the conductor. Left Coast is so lucky that we have her.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Maybe we could talk a little bit about that other concert that you guys did. This concert that we were just talking about. This is the Sounds of Nature, which had a number of other pieces, I believe, that were nature related on that program. That was fairly recently. This other concert you mentioned with the Voice of the Whale, that was a few years earlier, right? And Stacey, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that concert, and maybe tell us about that piece, Vox Balanae by George Crumb, which is like, for those of you who haven't heard that piece, do yourself a favor and listen, because it's a classic.
Yeah, it's really one of the seminal works of music, especially to do with nature. You know, I think it was one of the first. He's really got a lot of George Crumb likes to use a lot of extended techniques on the instruments and really get all kinds of very interesting sounds that you wouldn't imagine could come from the instruments. So the opening, the flute is singing and playing at the same time, and it's this really kind of raw sound. And there's the seagull sound that was mentioned earlier, where the cello kind of runs down the harmonics on the strings, and it's a seagull kind of sound, or a whale song kind of sound. And the piece goes through different stages of geological time. Each movement is named after a different stage of geological time, and ends on this, again, like the Assad, on a very kind of hopeful note for the future. It's got a very beautiful kind of tender melody at the end, and it's actually the whole set of variations on this melody, but at the end it comes back in kind of a chorale, and it's very peaceful and seems hopeful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, it also reminds me a little bit of the Messiaen Quartet at the End of Time that we mentioned earlier, because that movement is called for the end of Nocturne, or some lullaby for the end of time, and it sort of fades out just into nothingness, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the Takemitsu as well, and I wonder if you could contrast their approaches, because those are both really different composers, Takemitsu and Crumb, but both of them were inspired by nature and kind of interpreted it in different ways.
Yeah, the Takemitsu is also, they're both very evocative. I think, you know, Takemitsu has his own particular aesthetic. They both do, on the flute, use one similar technique, which is kind of an oscillation between a regular note and a harmonic, which sounds kind of, it's a timbral oscillation. And so it sounds, I don't know, sounds like sound coming through water, maybe, something like that. It seems really evocative of water to me in both pieces. And the movements are, one of the movements is based on Moby Dick, and the piece is generally kind of focused on the ocean and images of the ocean. So it's more gentle, I think, overall. And the instrumentation is smaller, and there's a little bit, it's more traditionally notated, except for those harmonics. So it's just the flute and guitar. It's a much more kind of intimate sound. And
right.
Yeah.
Versus the Crumb, which has lots of extended techniques, and of course his scores are like artworks kind of in themselves. Like yeah. And let's see what else about the Crumb. And there's also the fact about the theatrical aspect too with Crumb, right? He asks for specific directions for the performers.
Yeah, he asks for the performers to wear masks so that they are not individuals, but it's more of a kind of archetypal kind of person on stage. And there's lighting involved as well, which is blue So they ask for them to be, the stage to be bathed in blue light, and each person is amplified as well. Each instrument is amplified slightly, just to give a little bit more sense of resonance, which I think has to do with, you know, the idea of water and that kind of resonance through water.
Right. And maybe it evokes a kind of superhuman feeling as well, like, because the piece is spanning across geologic time, like, and which is so much more vast and grand than human time.
I think the masks are for that purpose. Yeah.
Maybe I should play a little excerpt that we have from that piece, Vox Balanae. So maybe something else that we could talk about are some of the different approaches that you've all encountered in pieces dealing with nature. Because I mean, I would say that I think it would be rare to meet a composer or a musician that has not had some kind of piece or some kind of experience that engaged with the natural world. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the different approaches that you've encountered. Are there some that you think are more or less effective? Are there cliches that you've noticed that you try to embrace or not embrace?
I have been having an amazing time for the past month or so because I've been walking lots and lots in the Berkeley Hills. And it's possible to get away from the city almost completely in about 15 minutes and go on the trails. There's the Jordan Trail, the High Jordan Trail, and the Low Jordan Trail, and all the fire trails. And you can disappear into the woods and be completely surrounded by bird song, which is making me very, very happy. And I think I've been thinking for that reason even more about the composers who have been interested in birdsong that I've run across who use it in their music. And in particular, because Tanya and I were just working on Messiaen Quartet for the end of time, and in the first movement, I really am supposed to be one of the birds, and I'm very, very high, and I think I am supposed to try to play in tune, but it's a little bit of a consolation that if it's not perfect, the birds have very interesting intonation. You know, they're not on the piano keys. They have these funny little sounds, and so it just reminds me of when we were rehearsing a lot, and we were trying so hard to help me. I mean, they were trying to help me also figure out how to make the most birdy sound I could that was all the right rhythms and everything. Um, so I'm very interested now to keep my eyes out for other composers who are interested in birdsong and to see how it influences them and how now that I've had a chance to pay attention to birdsong every day, because now I have a chance to take a walk every day, how it will change the way I play that music.
Right. I mean, in Messiaen, almost all of his pieces are inspired by birdsong, and that concert that you all did that you were mentioning before with that piece, that was for me, that was definitely a top 5 concert experience too. So I just want to like commend all of you for that performance. It's one of those things that makes me think like, you know, if even if this were the only experience that we had, like that wouldn't be the worst thing, right? Like it's just a moment of beauty that was very, very touching.
I remember going to that concert and hearing especially there's the one solo movement for the clarinet, which is a dialogue between time and the birds.
Yeah.
And time is so tired and just, you know, going kind of almost groaning, you know, really slow, long, low tones. And then the birds are just coming up and chirping, and they're so cheerful. It's such a great opposition. And ever since that concert, I've really, and of course now that things are quieter and the birds are out more too, I just have been noticing them so much more. But it really was inspired by that performance, I think. And it is really comforting, you know, to hear their sounds. And
I agree.
This crazy thing about the way birds sing, and some of it I'm sure is to communicate specifically about this and that, and to mate and all that. But it also just seems like a lot of time they're singing for fun.
Right.
And so that also feels so amazing that there are these animals that are also playing music for fun, you know, for just like we are.
And practicing too, I think. They spend a lot of time practicing. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep here, if it's too hot, but it's so beautiful that I don't mind too much.
A friend of mine told me a very interesting thing about his son-in-law is studying the way birds learn song, speaking and practicing. And it turns out that little birds learn much, much better when they're taught by a bird as opposed to when they try to imitate recordings.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because probably then, you know, if you're not getting some specific part, then the bird will probably stress that part for you so that you can get that part of the song correct.
Yeah. Interesting. Tanya, maybe I wonder if were there certain things that you're especially inspired by in nature-related pieces, like certain aspects, you know?
So yeah, we're talking about like how quiet it is now and we can hear the birds outside. And I've been thinking, because just at this very moment, I'm sheltered in place with Eric, who's learning all 32 Beethoven sonatas, like as a...
Oh my God.
I know. He's been sheltering in place with Beethoven. So I've been listening to a lot of Beethoven. And I just think, for me right now, like, I'm so happy. I realize I'm so happy without all these planes flying over all the time, so that when one single plane flies over, I'm like, oh, yeah, there's that thing. That is really irritating. And like, imagine that used to be happening every 45 minutes or whatever it was. And if you think about somebody like Beethoven and just the sounds that they were not hearing, like they were just steeped in natural sounds, I think. I mean, were there trains? I don't even know. With Beethoven, I don't think so yet. So there wasn't even that. There was just birds and whatever else, you know, like you
maybe
hear
horses
about,
or something like that, or people walking around.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there's a war, there's like a lot of gunfire and things, but you know, you hear about Beethoven and Brahms and people like taking their walks in the forest and getting inspiration from that. And I think like even now, just like living in Berkeley, like Anna was saying, you know, we can be like so quickly out of the city, and it is really inspiring just to have a certain amount of silence, actually, to sort of relate to as a musician. And I can imagine composers related so differently to sound than we do now. I mean, now you hear all the car horns and everything that have happened in music since then, since the development of all these extra noises that are just around us. I mean, it's completely changed music. So I've been thinking a lot about that, about 19th century composers and like what were they hearing and how maybe we're a little bit closer to that, because even like the hum of electricity is kind of loud. Like I noticed when, like if there's a blackout, like suddenly I just feel so much better. Like, oh, it's like
Everything's quiet, but my food is now rotting in the fridge. But at least you know I'm not hearing the annoying hum of the equipment. Yeah, soundscapes, yeah, are just changed so much throughout time, and yeah, I mean, it's like you said, you know, someone like Beethoven, he and Brahms, they all went on their walks in the forest, and you know, composers still do that now, but the sound, just the sounds that we're all hearing, whether the ones we're aware of or not aware of, they're just completely different. So it would be impossible for us not to be influenced by that, I think. Yeah. Stacey, what about you? I guess it's your turn to answer that question. Things in music that you know, it's connected with the natural world that inspire you most.
Well, I mean, as a flutist, I'm often a bird, so I think the bird thing really is really salient. Um, I don't know this, you know, this piece by Petros Vox that I'm playing now, that I'm, you know, for the concert on Monday, is it's very evocative. It's called Landscape, you know, so he's got a sense of, you know, and it's got a linear shape, it's got a musical shape, but it's also really evoking landforms, I think, you know, in ways there's you know, different contours happening, and then different amplitudes of sound, and different you know, the rhythmic movement or lack of movement, stillness, you know, all of that. I can see it really kind of evoking a physical landscape. And then also kind of moments in time, like there are one or two moments where it feels a little more like geological time as opposed to kind of, you know, busy everyday modern time, you know. And so I'm just speaking about that piece in particular. I think it's really really interesting, the stillness, first stillness, and then some kind of different forms, and then in between it all are these little bird chirps and bird songs coming in, and that piece, you know, that's directly related to nature. But you know, so much of everything we do in sound, you know, sound is so basic to life and to nature, and it's I don't know, just like sound and gesture, and the way we express these things, you know, by making music with our bodies, you know, with our, it's just, it feels very just fundamentally connected to nature.
And the issue of time, I think, is really interesting too. That maybe it's not, people don't necessarily think about right away, but I think but all of you have mentioned it in some way about, like, you know, human and non-human time, and just like that, the clarinet solo from Messiaen with the abyss of the birds, right, where like something that can feel timeless, like it's not moving, like there's time is no object, like for us, you know, we have to worry about time, like we're buzzing around, like, you know, like birds, and you know, and you know, Grisey, the French composer, would talk about like whale time versus insect time, and how they, you know, perceive things differently. So yeah, evoking that through music, I think that has a feeling of like naturalism or nature as well. Mm-hmm. Was there anything else that you all want to add that I haven't mentioned or asked about?
Oh, I've got traffic going, loud traffic. Sorry, that's me.
That's okay. No worries. You can probably hear my dog walking around here too.
Yeah.
Sounds of quarantine.
Yes.
What about you, Ryan?
Me?
Do you write music about nature?
Yeah, I do, from time to time. what are things that are inspiring to me? Well, we've been talking about journeys, or not journeys, but like, well, Tanya, you mentioned about like how you've been stressing about climate change for, you know, all these years. And that sort of really resonated with me a lot, because I had this, I can remember it happened to me. I started becoming very stressed around like the drought when it was at its height in California. And that's when it sort of became real and very visceral. And I went down the vortex reading about all these articles and how we're all screwed. And like, I mean, nature had always been important in my music, but then I think I started to realize, well, if I'm dealing with nature, I need to also deal with the collapse of nature too, which is kind of what we're experiencing, you know. And and the fact is that we've been in many extinctions over time as well. Like we're not the only species to have gone extinct, if that's what ends up happening, which, you know, at this rate we're headed in that direction. So yeah, I've gone through a lot of, that's something that is interesting to me in my music. And then the idea of geologic time is very interesting to me too, evoking space. And now I'm interested in evoking like this notion of dread versus beauty, which I think those things kind of existing simultaneously. That's something I'm kind of working on now in my current project that I'm working on. But yeah, I think that's all I'll say about myself. Nice job getting me to talk here, Anna. I don't know why I went off on that, but
it's interesting to hear. Yeah.
It's nice to
I had one other thing to say, which is just this idea of being an activist, you know, through music, through performance, and trying to figure out ways to do that. I think, you know, we're talking about depictions of nature in performance, or depictions of our feelings about it, but also, you know, it's interesting. I've been wanting to brainstorm more about ways that we can, you know, curate performances that are a kind of activism in themselves. And I think this Assad piece, sorry about the traffic in the background, speaking of the lack of sound these days. Just this Assad piece was one of those kinds of pieces, which was kind of generating thought and getting people to, you know, just be more aware of what's going on. But I think that we can do that through our performances as well. And I think that's an important thing to consider going into the future.
And getting people to think about something they might not have thought about before. Because I think if we were being honest, probably a lot of people who are, you know, attending classical concerts most likely would at least accept the, you know, science of what's happening. But people are not always thinking in a certain way, you know, like that commission is an example about, you know, that's reaching back in time, right? And something like Messiaen is about timelessness. So there's all these different angles, I think, that maybe that as artists we can highlight or spotlight or make people think, which is always, I think, one of the goals. Yeah.
And the great thing about music in general is that it kind of embodies all the emotions. So, I mean, you know, there is despair in music, and there is tragedy, and then there is hope, and then there is like resolution and all that stuff. So that's also really nice to be doing that, or writing that, or performing it, or listening to it, or whatever. So
yeah, great. Okay, well, I think I better let you all go. Thank you so much for doing this. It's really interesting to talk with all of you, and I hope you're all staying safe and taking good care. And everyone be sure to tune in for the Sheltering in Place concert. That's June 1st. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.